Welcome to ECO351, Study Session 1, an overview of international trade. Introduction. No country is self-complacent, hence the need for countries to come together and interact through trade. In this study session, we will discuss reasons for international trade, gains from international trade, and rationale for studying international economics. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the rationale behind the study of international economics. 2. Highlight the gains of international trade. Scope and method of international economics. Overview of international economics. International economics is the study of economic interaction between at least two countries. International economics is categorized into two broad parts: international trade and international factor flows. International factor flows can be collapsed into two, namely international finance and international migration. In this course, we will focus broadly on international trade, but discuss some basics of international finance. International trade is the transaction of business in forms of goods and services between at least two countries. The study of international trade has been a lively and controversial part of economics. Through international trade in goods and services, the economies of different countries are more closely linked to one another now than ever before. For instance, the trade statistics in Nigeria shows that Nigeria exports more than its imports now than in 1970s. In particular, the share of export is greater than the share of import, even though crude oil constitutes over 90% of total export. Yet, the economy is still experiencing large-scale unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Why must Nigeria trade with the rest of the world if the economy cannot experience development? Why is Nigeria's export higher? And why does crude oil always take the highest proportion in total export? Answers will be provided to these and other allied questions as the lecture continues. However, for now, it is useful to understand the basics of international economics. Concept of international economics. The motives and behaviors of economic agents in international trade are similar to what obtains in the domestic economy. That is, the sequence of events that made Nigeria textile products, say, appear in any part of the country, that is, Lagos, Benin, and Kaduna, are not so different from the sequence of events that makes the textile products appear in, say, United States, Italy, Germany, or Ghana. However, because Nigeria, US, Italy, Germany, and Ghana are sovereign states, export of Nigeria's textiles to a country like US may face stiff restriction, either through quota or tariff, or even outright ban. Thus, international flow of goods and services hinges on the trade policies of both the exporting and importing countries. We shall say more on trade policies in Chapter 5. If there are no restraints to trade flows, foreign exchange rate can play an important role in determining the value of traded goods. For instance, if the exchange rate of the naira to the dollar rises, that is, depreciates, Nigeria's textile products suddenly become cheaper in the US market. Conversely, if the exchange rate falls, that is, appreciates, Nigeria's textile product will be more expensive in the United States. The mechanism is as follows. An increase in exchange rate means increased quantity of naira for a unit of dollars, or a reduced quantity of dollars for a unit of naira. What this means is that in the US market, consumers of Nigerian products will need less dollars for the purchase of, say, textile products. Hence, with depreciation, Nigeria's export becomes relatively cheaper and more of it will be purchased. The converse occurs for the case of appreciation. Both stiff restraint to imports and the issue of exchange rate that act as drivers of international trade do not occur in the intertrade or interstate trade in the domestic economy. For instance, neither product restriction nor exchange rate plays any role in the transactions of goods between Lagos and Ibadan or between Onitsha and Abuja. This is because the Constitution forbids restrictions to interstate trade, and because there is only one currency generally acceptable for transaction in the country. Putting all this together, the idea of international economies hinges on 7 important themes, and they are gains from trade, the pattern of trade, protectionism, the balance of payment, exchange rate determination, international policy coordination, and international capital market. All these will be explained subsequently. Gains from trade. Why should Nigeria export part of goods it would have consumed locally? Would that not lead to starvation? Why should Nigeria import what it can produce locally? Would that not lead to cutting away jobs? Let us use an example to answer the question. Consider a situation whereby Nigeria can produce a certain good, say cocoa, in abundance, that is more than what domestic consumers need, with cheap resources. What will happen to the excess output? Stored or thrown away? If stored, it will necessarily cut away future jobs. If thrown away, it will lead to waste of resources. But if Nigeria as a country that can buy this excess, will it not be profitable than to keep it or throw it away? This simple example implies that there are mutual benefits when countries sell goods and services to one another, and the process will create jobs rather than cut jobs. The range of circumstances under which international trade is beneficial is wider than we appreciate. Yet people, most especially the businessmen and politicians, argue that since America's productivity is much higher than Nigeria's, trade with them will spell doom for the country. This is so, they argued, because none of our industries will be able to compete favorably with the business giants of the United States. The first model we shall discuss in Chapter 2 demonstrates that 2 countries can trade to their mutual benefit even when one of them is more efficient than the other at producing everything, and producers in the less efficient country can compete only by paying lower wages. Trade provides benefits by allowing countries to export goods whose production makes relatively heavy use of resources that are locally abundant, while importing goods whose production makes heavy use of resources that are locally scarce. The model that demonstrates this will be provided in Chapter 4. The gains from trade are limited to tangible goods, international migration, and international flow of capital in form of foreign direct investment and foreign portfolio investment are also forms of mutual benefit of trade. The latter will be discussed in Chapter 7. Patterns of trade. It will be difficult for trade analysts, scholars, to convince the government to change its trade policies either in favor or against opening up to trade if they are not equipped with a powerful theory that can explain the pattern of trade. The pattern of trade in this case refers to what type of product is being sold, who sells the product, and to whom is it sold. For instance, natural resource abundance can explain why Nigeria can produce and export crude oil. Also, good climate helps Nigeria and Brazil to export cocoa and coffee respectively. The United States can export aircraft and computers because of the abundant human capital in the country. Thus, the first theory that will be presented very soon demonstrate that productivity differential among countries can explain why trade should exist among them. The extra-hauling factor abundant theory also demonstrates that factor endowment can explain the basis for trade. Yet there is a theory that links the pattern of trade to relative supplies of natural resources such as capital, labor, and land on the one side, and the relative use of these factors in the production of different goods on the other side. This implies that theories explaining pattern of trade are many. All these theories are not without their flaws. Protectionism. Though gains from trade appear to be great, the alleged negative effects of international competition on the prosperity of the domestic industries has led some countries to shift their industries against such competition by limiting on some imported products which may be produced by local industries. Another way of helping these indigenous industries is by providing subsidies for them so that their power to compete in the global market may be improved. One primary objective of international trade is to demonstrate the likely effect of protectionism or protectionist policies and to possibly criticize it by way of solving and showing that the benefits from free trade is more than protectionist trade. More will be said about these in Chapter 6. Over the years, international economists have developed a simple yet powerful analytical framework for determining the effect of government policies that affect international trade. This framework not only predicts the effect of trade policies, it also allows cost-benefit analysis and defines criteria for determining when government intervention is good for the economy. This issue will be dealt with extensively in Chapter 5. Balance of payment. Balance of payment represents the record of a particular country's transaction with the rest of the world. For instance, Nigeria buys import goods from the rest of the world and sells export goods and services to them. Also, capital flows from Nigeria to the rest of the world, while capital flows out of Nigeria to the rest of the world. What is the implication when the value of goods and services sold to the rest of the world, that is export, is larger than the value of imports from the rest of the world? That will give us a trade surplus, and it occurred in Brazil in 1990. What is the implication of running a deficit balance of payment? Explaining the balance of payment of Nigeria says will not only show the volume of transaction, but also show the position of the country in the world and implication of being so. This aspect will be dealt with in Chapter 7. Exchange rate determination. The major difference between international economics and other economic disciplines is that it studies economies with different sovereign currencies. In Nigeria, for instance, a dollar was exchanged for around 22 naira in the early 1990s, but in the early 2009, it hovers around 140 naira. In the 1970s and early 1980s, the Nigerian government pegged the exchange rate to a particular amount, but since late 1980s, the government has decided to apply a series of exchange rate regimes ranging from crawling peg to floating exchange rate regime. Why is government adopting different exchange rate regime and for what purpose? This question is very crucial in international macroeconomics. We shall expose students to the basic of exchange rate in Chapter 8. International policy coordination. Each country of the world is a sovereign nation and has the statutory power to choose its own economic policies. However, some of the policies selected may be beneficial to the domestic economy, though it may actually inflict injury on other countries. For instance, a country may reduce interest rate in order to stimulate investment. The policy may lead to outflow of capital, which may cause inflation in other countries. If too much money is in circulation, it causes inflation. This may lead to conflicts of interest among countries. One problem that international economics intends to solve is how to produce an acceptable degree of harmony among the international trade and monetary policies of different countries. This aspect will again be discussed fully in the advanced chapters. International capital market. A sophisticated economy consists of an extensive market where individuals or firms exchange money now for promises to pay in the future. The importance of trade in goods and services has been accompanied by growing international capital market, which links the capital market of individual countries. International markets differ from domestic market in several ways. First, they must cope with special regulations that many countries impose on foreign investment. Second, some special risks are associated with international trade. One of them is currency fluctuation. Another one is the refusal of a debtor country to pay its debt. The growing international trade and their huge problem requires examination, and this will be discussed fully in the next volume. Summary. In this study session, you learn that international trade is a transaction of business between at least two countries. Through international trade in goods and services, the economies of different countries are more likely to be close to one another now than ever before. We also saw that the range of circumstances under which international trade is beneficial appears to be wider than we appreciate. Yet people, most especially the businessmen and politicians, argue that since America's productivity is much higher than Nigeria's, trade with them will spell doom for the country. This is so, they argue, because none of our industries will be able to compete favorably with the business giants of the US. However, empirical evidences have shown that countries, whether big or small, developed or developing, benefit from international trade sessions. This is the end of study session 1. Thanks for listening.